She never made it to the pickup line. Heather Bogle had just walked out of the Whirlpool plant in Clyde after an overnight shift, tired in the way you get when the sun is coming up and your body wants to be anywhere but awake. A security camera caught her leaving the building a little after 6 in the morning, a small figure crossing the frame like any other worker heading to a car. She was 28, a single mom, and her whole day was already scheduled in her head because her daughter needed her to be on time. A few hours from now, there would be a school, a parking lot, a small face looking for her car. Instead, Heather disappeared between the time she clocked out and the moment she was supposed to show up. When she didn't arrive, the first calls sounded ordinary. A friend, family, someone checking in. Then the calls sharpened into something else. She hadn't done this before. She didn't skip her daughter. She didn't vanish without a message. In a small Ohio town where shifts and schedules overlap and people recognize each other's cars, the absence started to feel loud. By the next day, deputies found Heather's car at the Somerton Apartments, a complex not far from the plant. It looked parked the way any car might look when someone ran inside for a minute. But the trunk held the reason she hadn't come home. Heather was inside, beaten and murdered, her body curled in the trunk like someone had tried to arrange her, to turn what was done into something almost staged. The violence didn't stop at killing. Whoever did this had taken time afterward. Her hair had been cut off. Her fingernails had been cut down close, a brutal, deliberate attempt to erase what she might have carried under them from fighting back. Investigators would later say she had defensive wounds, the kind that tell you the victim was alive, aware, and trying to survive right up to the end. She had been handcuffed. She had been shot twice in the back. The scene landed like a shockwave. People held fundraisers for Heather's little girl, Mackenzie, who was 5. Strangers showed up to vigils. In the background, Heather's own life details came into focus in the way they always do after a sudden death, when everyone tries to build a map backward. She worked hard, and she wanted out of the factory someday. She'd gone to nursing school. She had just failed her nursing boards, the kind of setback that makes you feel like you're standing still while everyone else moves forward. And there was tension in her personal life. Heather had been in a relationship with a co-worker, Carmela Badillo. It was her first same-sex relationship, and it had ended in a blow-up. The messages between them were angry enough to draw attention, and in the first frantic days, that relationship became an obvious place to look. Investigators dug into phone records. They interviewed. They tried to fit motive onto the outline of Heather's final hours. Badillo was questioned and, eventually, ruled out. But the case didn't settle. It turned. Detective Sean O'Connell, the lead investigator, began focusing on 3 people who lived around the apartment complex where the car was found. Kiona Bohr, along with Omar Satchel and Carrie Jeffrey. The theory hardened quickly, as if once their names were picked, everything else had to be shaped to match. Tips, timelines, little inconsistencies, the normal mess of human behavior all got interpreted as guilt. People in town started looking at their faces differently. Rumors had a place to land. There was a problem, though, and it wasn't a small one. Heather had fought. There was DNA under her cuticles, the kind of evidence that can be a clock you can't argue with. The testing did not match the 3 people O'Connell was pushing. Not Omar, not Carrie, not Kiona. The investigation should have pivoted right there. Instead, it kept grinding forward in the same direction. The pressure to solve the case was intense, and in that pressure, the line between certainty and tunnel vision blurred. O'Connell continued to build his case, even as scientific evidence excluded his suspects. According to later court findings, he left out those DNA results in a report to the prosecutor, turning a case that should have been re-examined into one that kept rolling toward the wrong people. For Kiona Bohr, the cost was immediate and personal. She was a mother. She said the suspicion stole her life in pieces. She said she started noticing cars slow down, strangers staring, like the accusation had a shape. Work opportunities, relationships, a sense of safety. When strangers think you're capable of something monstrous, they don't need proof to punish you. Even when you're never charged, you can still be treated like you were. Time passed, and justice didn't. A new sheriff, Chris Hilton, came into the office with a different mindset. He believed the case was solvable, but only if they started over and treated it like it was the first day. The approach was simple and uncomfortable. Revisit everything, re-interview, recheck, assume nothing. It meant admitting that the most visible theory might be wrong, and it meant looking at the people who were easiest to miss, the ones who didn't live near the car, the ones who weren't already on the community's list. While the murder case stalled, the investigation into Detective O'Connell's conduct began moving. Prosecutor Tim Braun opened a criminal inquiry into how evidence had been handled. O'Connell was indicted and later pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence for omitting the DNA results that excluded his 3 suspects. A judge sentenced him to prison, a rare moment when a case about a murder also became a case about power and what happens when the wrong person decides they already know the answer. But Heather still needed her name tied to the truth. The DNA under her nails did what it was always supposed to do. It stayed. It waited. And when the case was worked the right way, it led investigators to a man named Daniel Myers, a Whirlpool co-worker who, to most people around him, looked like just another part of the same routine Heather lived in. Same plant, same shifts, same small-town overlap. A killer hiding in plain sight isn't always a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it's someone who knows your schedule because they share it. Authorities arrested Myers in 2017 and charged him with aggravated murder. The years between Heather's death and that arrest were years her family couldn't get back, years her daughter grew older without answers. In court, the story of Heather's final hours finally moved toward a conclusion shaped by evidence, not guesses. In February 2019, Daniel Myers pleaded guilty to murdering Heather Bogle and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The plea ended the case in the way court cases end, with paperwork and a judge's words. But it didn't end what Heather's family had been living since the morning she walked out of that plant and never came home. When you trace the timeline, it's not just a murder story. It's a story of a young mother who fought hard enough to leave proof behind, a system that nearly buried that proof under certainty, and the years it took to dig it back out. Heather didn't get to pick up her daughter that day, but she did leave something behind that outlasted the lies, the shortcuts, and the wrong names. She left the one thing that couldn't be talked away. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.